The message came at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, while I was reviewing scholarship applications in my office. The name on the screen made my chest tighten in a way I had not felt in years. My mother. For a second I just stared at it. Not because I was surprised she existed, but because she had chosen not to exist in my life for so long. I opened the message slowly. She wrote that she had seen me on television, that I looked beautiful, that she and my father were proud of the woman I had become. Proud. I read that word twice, waiting for the rest of it. Waiting for the part where she would mention the day they left me. Waiting for the apology that should have come before anything else. Never did. Instead, she asked if we could reconnect as a family. Said maybe enough time had passed. Said they would love to see me again. Like I had simply moved away and forgotten to call. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting under studio lights on a national morning show, smiling as people applauded the program I built from nothing. From nothing, except that is not true. I built it from everything they said I was not. And now, suddenly, they remembered I existed. I leaned back in my chair and let out a quiet breath. Not angry. Not shocked. Just clear. Some people do not come back because they miss you. They come back because the world finally sees your value. So I replied. I told them I would be happy to see them. I invited them to dinner at my home that Saturday. What they did not know was that this was not a reunion. It was the first time they were going to hear the truth. I grew up in a house where love sounded like an evaluation. We lived in San Jose, California, in a quiet neighborhood where everything looked polished from the outside. My parents ran a private academic coaching center for high-performing kids, the kind of place where parents paid thousands of dollars to make sure their children stayed ahead. At home, that mindset never turned off. My twin sister Claire was exactly what they believed in. She read before kindergarten, solved math problems for fun, and spoke with a calm confidence that made adults smile. Teachers called her exceptional. My parents called her proof. I loved Claire. I still do. But standing next to her felt like standing beside a spotlight that made everything about me look dim. I was not failing. I just learned differently. Numbers blurred when I felt rushed. Time tests made my hands shake. But I could remember entire stories after hearing them once. I could turn a simple idea into something alive in my head. I filled notebooks with sketches, characters, and scenes that made sense to me, even if they did not fit inside a worksheet. My father called it a distraction. My mother called it avoidance. At dinner, conversations were never about how we felt. They were about results. Claire would share her scores, and my parents would nod with quiet pride. Then they would turn to me. What did you get? Why is it lower? Did you study enough? There was always a gap between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I never closed it. One afternoon, my father tapped my report card with his finger and said something that stayed with me for years. Average is what happens when a child refuses to rise. I was 10 years old. I did not understand everything yet, but I understood enough to know that in our house, love was not something you had. It was something you had to earn. And Claire was earning it faster than I ever could. The hardest part was that she never made me feel small. When our parents were not around, she helped me study, shared her notes, and told me I was good at things they did not understand. But she was a child too. She could not change the way we were being measured. In our home, we were not just daughters. We were outcomes. The year everything changed, our lives revolved around one test. My parents had decided that Claire and I would both apply to a prestigious gifted academy in Palo Alto. It was the kind of school that parents talked about like it guaranteed a future. Smaller classes, advanced curriculum, a direct path to top colleges. For my parents, it was more than an opportunity. It was a statement. They told everyone their twin daughters were applying. They printed brochures from their center with smiling students and words like excellence and discipline. At dinner, they talked about the school as if we were already accepted. But behind closed doors, things felt very different for me. Every afternoon turned into practice tests, timed sections, corrections, repetition. If I hesitated, my father would remind me that hesitation was weakness. If I got something wrong, my mother would say I needed to focus harder. The more pressure they applied, the harder it became to think. My hands would start to shake before I even picked up the pencil. The numbers on the page blurred together. I knew some of the answers, but the clock made everything feel like it was slipping away. Claire moved through the material with ease. I struggled to breathe. One night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The paper in front of me had softened under my hands from how tightly I held it. I was not trying to be difficult. I was trying not to disappoint them. But the more I tried, the more I froze. When the test day finally came, I already knew how it would end. Claire walked out calm and composed. My parents smiled at her like the outcome had never been in doubt. I walked out feeling like I had failed before it even began. A week later, the results arrived. Claire passed easily. I did not. Not by a small margin. Not in a way that could be explained away. I failed clearly enough that the admissions director suggested I might benefit from a different learning environment. One with less pressure and more support. I remember standing there, waiting for my parents to say something, to ask if I was okay, to tell me it was just one test. Instead, the house went quiet. Not loud anger. Not yelling. Just silence. And somehow that felt worse. Because in that silence I realized something I had been trying not to see. Failure did not just disappoint them. It erased me. 2 days after the results came in, my mother told me to pack a small bag. She said it calmly, like she was asking me to get ready for a short trip. She told me they had found a place that could help me. A place with more support. A better environment for someone like me. I wanted to believe her. I told myself it was tutoring. Maybe a special program. Maybe this was the moment they were finally going to understand that I needed a different kind of help. The next morning we got into the car before the sun was fully up. No one talked during the drive. Claire sat in the back seat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I could see her reflection in the window. Her eyes looked glassy like she had been crying, but she did not say anything. I did not ask questions. Some part of me already knew. We drove across the bay and stopped in front of a large building with a faded sign that read Bayview House. It did not look like a school. It did not look like a place you visited for a few hours. It looked like a place people stayed. My father got out first and opened the trunk. He handed me my bag without looking at me. My mother walked ahead toward the front desk, already speaking to the staff like she had rehearsed this moment. I followed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, everything smelled unfamiliar. The walls were plain. There were children sitting quietly in a common room, some watching us, some not even looking up. I stood there while my parents explained who I was. They said I was difficult. They said I was struggling. They said they had tried everything. I opened my mouth to speak, but no one asked me anything. No one asked what it felt like at home. No one asked why I froze during tests. No one asked if I was scared. My father signed papers. My mother nodded at the staff. And just like that, it was done. When they turned to leave, something inside me snapped into panic. I ran after them, my voice breaking as I called out for my mom. I told her I could do better. I told her I would try harder. I told her I would stop drawing, stop being slow, stop being a problem. A staff member gently held my shoulders, trying to keep me from running out the door. My mother did not turn around. My father paused for a second at the car. He looked back at me, not with anger, not even with sadness. Just distance. Your sister has a future, he said. You need people who know how to deal with children like you. Then he got into the car. Claire pressed her hand against the window as they pulled away, her face pale and wet with tears. I stood there watching until the car disappeared, still waiting for it to stop, still waiting for them to come back. They never did. The first night at Bayview House, I slept in my shoes. I kept thinking that if I stayed ready, they might come back for me. Maybe they just needed time. Maybe this was a mistake they would fix once they realized how quiet the house felt without me. I did not unpack my bag. I did not want to belong there. Every sound in that place felt unfamiliar. Doors closing. Voices echoing down the hallway. The soft hum of a building that never truly slept. I lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for headlights to sweep across the window. They never came. The next morning I asked when I could go home. The staff gave me kind but careful answers. Soon. We will see. Focus on settling in. Soon became days. Days became weeks. I started writing letters. I apologized for my grades. I promised I would work harder. I told them I missed Claire. I told them I would stop drawing if that was what they wanted. I folded each letter neatly and handed it to the front desk like it was something important. I waited for replies the way you wait for rain during a long dry season. Nothing came. Then one afternoon, a letter was returned to me. Unopened. There was a red mark across the envelope, like a quiet confirmation that it had never been read. I stared at it for a long time before I understood what it meant. This was not temporary. This was not a break. I had not been sent away to get better. I had been removed. There were other kids at Bayview House with stories I could not fully understand yet. Some had lost parents. Some had been taken from unsafe homes. Some had families that visited on weekends. And then there were kids like me. Children who still had parents somewhere living their lives choosing not to come back. At first I kept telling myself there had to be a reason. Something I could fix. Something I could become. But slowly that belief started to fade. Because the hardest part about being left behind is not the moment it happens. It is the silence that follows. The kind that teaches you day by day that no one is coming. Everything started to change on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. A small group gathered in the common room for a reading session. Most of us sat quietly, some interested, some just passing time. I stayed near the edge as usual, not wanting to be noticed. That was when she sat down beside me. Her name was Margaret Brooks. She had soft gray hair, reading glasses that slipped down her nose, and a canvas bag filled with books that looked well loved. She did not start by asking me to introduce myself. She did not call on me to read out loud. She simply noticed the corner of my notebook peeking out from under my arm. "Do you write stories?" she asked. I shrugged. I had heard that question before, usually followed by a lecture about focus or wasted potential. But her voice was different. There was no judgment in it. Just curiosity. "When you feel ready, I would love to read one," she said. Love. Not correct. Not fix. Just read. The next week she came back. And this time she brought her husband, Daniel. He did not talk much at first. He moved around the room quietly, noticing things most people ignored. When he saw the broken tape recorder sitting on a shelf, he picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and asked if anyone used it. Someone said it had been broken for months. He nodded, sat down at a table, and started taking it apart. We all watched. Piece by piece he worked on it like it mattered. An hour later he pressed a button, and the machine clicked to life. He handed it to me. "Writers need tools too," he said. I did not know what to say. So I just nodded and held it carefully, like it might disappear. That night, instead of writing, I spoke into the recorder. First my voice shook. I paused too much. I forgot what I wanted to say. But no one was timing me. No one was watching. The words came back slowly, then faster. Stories I had been holding inside finally had somewhere to go. Margaret listened to every recording I made. She asked questions about the characters, the choices, the endings. She treated my imagination like it was something valuable. Daniel built me a small wooden box to keep the recorder safe. They did not see me as a problem. They saw me as a person. And for the first time since I had been left behind, I started to believe that maybe I was not something that needed to be fixed. Maybe I was something that needed to be understood. A few months after they started visiting, Margaret asked me a question I did not know how to answer. "How would you feel about living with us?" I thought I had heard her wrong. People visited Bayview House all the time. They read books, brought snacks, spent a few hours being kind, and then they left. Wanting to take someone home was different. Wanting to take me home felt impossible. I did not say yes right away. Not because I did not want to go, but because I was afraid to believe it could be real. I had already learned what it felt like when people decided you were not worth keeping. The process took time. There were interviews, home visits, background checks, meetings where adults spoke in careful voices while I sat quietly, trying to understand what was being decided about my life. My biological parents were notified. My father sent a short email saying he trusted the system to make the most practical decision. My mother did not respond at all. Practical. That was the word they chose. Not daughter. Not child. Just something to be placed where it made the most sense. Margaret cried when she read that message. Not loudly, not in a way that made the room uncomfortable. Just quietly, like someone who understood what those words really meant. Daniel sat across from me at their kitchen table one afternoon and said something simple. "A child is not something you give up on when it gets hard." There was no speech after that. No pressure. Just a steady presence that did not disappear. When the adoption was finally approved, Margaret and Daniel told me I could keep my last name if I wanted, or I could choose theirs. I thought about it for a long time. Then I chose Brooks. That night, Margaret gave me a new notebook with my name written on the first page. Olivia Brooks. I traced the letters with my finger, reading it over and over. For the first time, my name did not feel like something I had to prove. It felt like something I belonged to. Life did not suddenly become perfect after I moved in with Margaret and Daniel. Healing does not work like that. For a long time, the old voices stayed with me. Every time a teacher handed back a test, I still felt that familiar tension in my chest. Every time I hesitated, I heard my father's voice telling me I was falling behind. But something had changed. This time I was not facing it alone. In high school, I joined the student radio club almost by accident. A friend mentioned they needed people to help record segments, and I signed up without thinking too much about it. Speaking into a microphone felt different from speaking in front of people. There was space. There was time to breathe. I started by reading simple announcements, then short stories. Then I began writing my own segments, small pieces about everyday things that somehow felt bigger when you said them out loud. Margaret listened to every recording. Daniel would sit quietly in the background, nodding in that way he had that made you feel like you were doing something right without needing to say it. One afternoon, Margaret suggested we bring the recordings to the local library where she volunteered. There were younger kids there, some struggling with reading, some just restless, some already convinced they were not good at learning. I recognized that look immediately. I had seen it in the mirror. So I tried something different. Instead of asking them to read from a page, I asked them to listen first. I turned simple lessons into stories. I added sound effects, small pauses, questions that made them curious about what came next. Something shifted. A boy who refused to read out loud leaned closer to the recorder. A girl who said she hated books started asking what happened to the characters after the story ended. It was not magic. It was connection. For the first time, I understood something clearly. I was not slow. I just needed a different way in. And maybe other kids did too. What started in that small library room slowly turned into something bigger than I expected. First, it was just a few weekly sessions. A handful of kids. A borrowed recorder. Paper notes and ideas I sketched out late at night. Margaret helped organize reading circles. Daniel showed up with boxes of secondhand books and equipment he repaired himself. We did not have a name for it yet. We just knew it was working. Parents started staying after sessions to talk. Some of them were confused. Some were relieved. They told me their kids had been labeled distracted, difficult, or behind. They told me they had tried everything. And for the first time, they were seeing their children lean in instead of shut down. That was when I realized this was not just a project. It was a need. We eventually gave it a name. Bright Path Learning. Because that was what I wanted it to be. A different path. Not easier, not less meaningful. Just better suited to the way a child's mind naturally worked. We moved from one library room to another. Then to community centers. Then schools started reaching out. A short video of one of our sessions was shared online. A young boy reading his first full paragraph into a microphone. His voice shaky but determined. His mother sitting beside him, quietly crying. The video spread faster than anything I had ever experienced. Then came local interviews. Then funding offers. Then partnerships. Within a few years, Bright Path became something real. A program with staff. With waiting lists. With families who trusted us to help their children believe in themselves again. People called it success. But to me it still felt simple. I was just giving kids what I had once needed. Someone who stayed long enough to understand them. The morning everything shifted again started like any other. I was invited onto a national morning show to talk about Bright Path Learning. They asked about the program, the children, the approach. At the end, the host leaned forward and asked a simple question. What inspired you to do this work? I paused for a moment. Then I answered honestly but carefully. I said I once believed I was not worth investing in. And that too people showed. Me, every child learns differently and deserves someone who does not give up on them. I did not say my parents' names. I did not tell the full story. But it was enough. The clip aired across the country. People shared it. Messages came in from parents, teachers, even adults who said they saw themselves in that moment. 3 days later, My phone lit up with a message I never expected to see again. My father. Then another. My mother. They said they had seen the interview. That they were proud. That they always knew I would do something meaningful. Always knew. I read those words slowly, trying to understand how they could rewrite something so completely. There was no mention of Bayview House. No mention of the letters I sent that came back unopened. No mention of the years they chose not to show up. Instead, they asked if we could reconnect. If we could rebuild as a family. First, it almost sounded reasonable. Until I learned the truth. Through Claire. Their coaching center was struggling. Complaints from parents. Pressure from former students speaking out. Their reputation was starting to crack. And suddenly my story looked useful. A comeback story. A way to prove that their methods worked even if the path looked different. That was when it became clear. They were not reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they needed me. I did not respond right away. I sat with the messages for a full day, reading them more than once, not because I was confused, but because I wanted to be sure of what I felt. Then I made a decision. If they wanted to reconnect, it would not be on their terms. I invited them to dinner. Saturday evening. My home in Seattle. They replied within minutes. Too quickly. Like they had been waiting for an opening. My mother asked if she should bring anything. My father asked if we could take a few photos together. Photos. I told them we would see how the evening went. Then I made a few more calls. I invited Margaret and Daniel to stay for the weekend. I called Claire and told her everything. There was a long pause on the other end before she said she would be there. If they were going to tell a story about our family, she wanted to hear it in person. All week I prepared calmly. Not for a confrontation. For clarity. I gathered the things that mattered. My adoption papers. The first notebook Margaret gave me. The small recorder Daniel had fixed all those years ago. Caleb helped me put together a short video of our sessions. Kids reading. Laughing. Trying again after struggling. Saturday evening came quietly. They arrived exactly on time. My mother stepped inside first, holding a bouquet of expensive flowers, her smile wide and practiced. She hugged me tightly, as if the years between us had simply folded away. My father followed, scanning the room in a way that felt more like assessment than admiration. You have done well for yourself, he said. For yourself. Not for us. Not for anyone else. Claire was already there, standing near the dining table. When they saw her, surprise crossed their faces, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by that same controlled composure I remembered so well. Margaret and Daniel sat at the far end of the table, quiet, waiting. At first my parents did not really see them. To people like my parents, some people only become visible when they are impossible to ignore. Dinner began with polite conversation. Too polite. My mother complimented the house, the food, the table setting, anything that kept her away from the past. My father asked about BrightPath. How many students, how fast we were expanding, whether I had considered partnerships with private academic programs. He was not asking as a father. He was asking as someone evaluating an opportunity. I answered simply, and waited, because the truth had not been spoken yet, but it was already in the room. Halfway through dinner, my mother reached across the table and gently touched my wrist. Her voice softened. Olivia, she said, we have missed so much time. Maybe this is the right moment to start healing. People have seen your story now. It might be time they understand where it began. I looked down at her hand for a second, then back at her. Which part of the story? I asked. My father leaned forward slightly. The part about resilience, he said. The part about strong expectations. About how structure creates success even if the path is not perfect. Claire shifted in her seat. Stop, she said quietly. But he kept going. We are hosting an event next month. Families trust us. Your presence would help them see the full picture. That success still comes from a strong foundation. A foundation. I let that word settle for a moment. Then I stood up. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just steady. I picked up my glass, not to make a toast, but to give my hands something to hold. You are right about one thing, I said. Success does come from a foundation. The room went quiet. Before anyone shares a story about where I came from, I continued, I want to introduce the people who actually built that foundation. I turned toward Margaret. When I was 11, I believed I was too difficult to love. Margaret found me sitting in a room where no one was asking why I was struggling. She did not try to fix me. She asked me to share my story. Margaret covered her mouth, her eyes already filling with tears. I turned to Daniel. Daniel took a broken recorder and made it work again. He showed me that things are not useless just because they stop working the way people expect them to. I paused. Then I looked at Claire. She met my eyes steady. She loved me when it was easier to stay quiet, I said. Then I looked back at my parents. And since you said you were proud after seeing me on television, I thought tonight would be a good time for you to meet the people who actually raised me. My father's expression tightened. My mother slowly turned her head toward Margaret and Daniel, really seeing them for the first time. Recognition hit her. Years ago, Margaret had challenged her at an education panel. My mother had dismissed her as someone who did not understand how success worked. Now she was sitting across from her. As my mother. In every way that mattered. Daniel met my father's gaze calmly. No anger. Just truth. My father stood slightly from his chair. This is inappropriate, he said. No, Claire replied, her voice steady now. What happened was inappropriate. I reached for a folder beside me and placed a single printed page on the table. An email. Short. Clear. Claire is the child we can invest in. Olivia needs a different environment. No one spoke. I was a child, I said quietly. Not an investment. Not a strategy. Not something you could remove and replace. Caleb pressed play on the video. The screen lit up with children learning in ways that made sense to them. Laughing. Trying again. Finding confidence where they had been told there was none. This is the foundation, I said. Not pressure. Not perfection. Consistency. Patience. And people who stay. My mother's eyes filled with tears. But when she finally spoke, her words were not what I expected. Do you know what this could do to us? I held her gaze. That is the first honest thing you have said tonight. No one argued after that. There was nothing left to defend. Only the truth. And it was finally loud enough to be heard. I thought that would be the end of it. For one night it felt like enough. The truth had been spoken. The room had gone quiet. My parents had left without finishing their meal, their version of the story sitting unfinished on the table. But silence does not last long when reputation is involved. The next morning my father posted a statement. It was long, careful, polished in the way only he could manage. He wrote about difficult decisions, about doing what was necessary during a challenging time, about a daughter who had misunderstood the intentions behind their actions. He said they had always loved me, that they had hoped for reconciliation, that the dinner had been an unexpected attempt to embarrass them. My mother shared it. Then they tagged media accounts, education groups, people connected to my work. They were not trying to tell the truth. They were trying to control it. For a moment I just stared at the post. Years ago that would have been enough to silence me, enough to make me question myself, enough to pull me back into that quiet space where I felt small. But that version of me was gone. I did not respond right away. I called Margaret, then Daniel, then Claire, then Caleb. We spoke calmly. We did not plan an attack. We agreed on one thing. If I responded, it would be with truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. An hour later I wrote a single post. Clear. Simple. I explained that I had been placed in a residential home at 11, after failing to meet academic expectations. I shared that Margaret and Daniel had fostered and later adopted me when my parents chose not to return. No exageración. No anger. Just facts. Then I ended with one sentence. I was not raised by high standards. I was saved by consistent love. Claire shared it. And this time people listened. The response was bigger than I expected. Messages came in from parents, teachers, former students. Some shared their own experiences. Some asked questions about my parents' program. Some simply said thank you. For the first time, the story was not being shaped by them. It was being seen for what it was. A few days later, my father messaged me again. Short. Direct. He said I had damaged the family name. That I should take the post down before things went further. My mother sent a separate message. She said she hoped I was satisfied. I read both messages carefully. Years ago, those words would have shaken me. I would have replayed them, searching for a way to fix what I had done wrong. This time I felt something different. Nothing. No fear. No need to explain. No need to defend myself. I replied once, "I hope one day you understand that children are not investments. They are people." Then I blocked both numbers. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because I finally understood something I had spent years trying to learn. Healing is not about getting an apology. It is about no longer needing one. A month after everything settled, life felt quieter. Not empty. Just clear. Brightpath kept growing. New families joined. New stories filled the rooms we created. Kids who once believed they were not enough started to see themselves differently. And every time I watched that happen, I thought about where it all began. Not with success. Not with recognition. But with someone choosing to stay. Margaret still keeps every notebook I have ever filled. Daniel still fixes things around the center like it is second nature. Claire visits more often now, no longer carrying the weight of being perfect. We are not a perfect family. But we are a real one. And that difference matters more than anything I was ever taught growing up. People sometimes ask me if I got revenge. I tell them the truth. This was never about revenge. It was about refusing to let someone else decide my worth. It was about building a life that did not depend on approval from people who only saw me when I was useful. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt like you were not enough, like you were always falling short of someone else's expectations, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the problem. The environment you were measured in might have been. And you are allowed to grow beyond it. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have ever had to rebuild your life from a place where no one believed in you, I would like to hear your story too. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we are not alone. They left me because I was not enough. I built a life that proved I never needed them to be.